to die, and I had a very strong faith in afterlife. I was busy with an infant and a husband who was only home 2 weekends a month. Plus, I was working insane hours at a part-time job for an event that was thrown in our lap after they fired the people who had always run it. So although I knew she was very ill, I didn't know just how close she was to the end of her life. But I would go and sit with her while she had her chemo treatments, and I would bring the baby. On my days off, I would bring her dinner. It was still a shock when they found her in the grocery parking lot, slumped over the steering wheel of her car. I believe she only went to the store that afternoon because she knew it was her time and didn't want to be found in the house a day or two later, probably by the neighbor. I actually really believe she did that as a favor to all of us and to the neighbor who checked on her every day. But it was still really surreal, So, I couldn't believe it. It didn't feel real. When my friend Taya found she had terminal cancer, and she found it was kind of crazy. I guess she had it a long time, but nobody knew. I would go visit her every 2 weeks. She asked me to find her an Easter hat when her hair began to fall out. Her entire family, I'd worked with her for a long time, years before. So I knew the whole family, and I'd watch the kids grow up, the whole thing. Even though she was a lot older than me. Her entire family was in denial about how close the end was, and she really appreciated that she could be honest with me. We'd always shared a sense of practicality. She asked me which children she should leave her fine jewelry to, where she should donate her mink coat, and a host of other things. Her daughter was not handling the situation well. This was her college-age daughter. And she was creating a lot of drama in her home at that time. Just screaming matches. This was really bad. I was sitting there thinking, It's like I wanted to take her to my house, I remember, because my house was at least quiet, even though Anya was young. Taya looked forward to my visits because they were simple, peaceful, and she kept her sense of humor almost until the end. We had very honest discussions about the afterlife, and when she questioned her faith, she turned to me. When she was very near the end, she often didn't want me to come visit because she said she wasn't up to it. I felt badly about that, but honored her wishes and still called her every week then to see if she would like me to stop by. And once in a blue moon, she'd say yes, but I think she was just in bed a lot and, really just not doing much at that point. I feel like you lose the people you love bit by bit when you know they have a terminal illness. At the very end, they may not be truly present and often sleep most of the time. So the process is painful to observe, but it can be very poignant and meaningful to both of you. It is actually a gift to know ahead of time that you are terminal because it allows you to get some affairs in order and to voice your feelings to those you love. I remember I read a magazine article about the gift of cancer, and I remember thinking, well, it's true. It was just a Woman's Day or something. I remember thinking at the time, what a weird article. But I read the article and I loved it, and it was about family members who, walked this road with their mother or with their father or whoever it was, and the woman wrote it because how much it meant to the mother to be able to tie up loose ends because she knew she was terminal, and if you just have a heart attack and go, you could have a lot of regrets. So, go ahead.
Yeah.
Should I continue or just?
No, I just what's the emotion that you're feeling reading this here?
Well, it's I'm remembering how hard it was at the time.
Yeah. Which one or what?
Well, in general, all of them. They're all a little different.
Yeah.
With my dad, I would say it was that I want to almost say regret. That we weren't closer. Because we were really close when I was young. but, you know, most teenagers aren't that close to their parents. I mean, it's not necessarily the closest time of your life to your parents in general, you know, because you kind of find your own way a little bit. But he was of a generation where, like, he just didn't get women, you know. There was men's work and there was women's work, and, you know, never the twain shall meet. I mean, he was, like, really very old-fashioned in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So, as I got older, I felt like he didn't know how to relate to me. So it wasn't just like me going away a little bit, but he no longer knew how to relate to me. Like something changed, and it was sad to see that. So I kind of, you know.
Yeah, and I'm just struck by the way you describe it is uncomfortable and awkward.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like painful.
It was sad, you know.
Yeah, and in a way that's hard because he's your dad, because you're just 16. It's hard. Well, I'll just say my sense. I feel you were. If I were in that situation, I would feel like robbed in a way. And so it's not just like awkward is one level,
Right.
but like there's something unjust, unfair.
It did feel that way.
You were 16.
You know, it did feel that way, but
There's like something much more.
But it wasn't just
that
he died so young that I was robbed of that. It was also that he was emotionally unavailable. Like, even if he had lived, how much,
right.
You know, probably at this point in my life, we could have said, well, he would be over 100. So I doubt he would have gotten there. But like, I had always thought, I guess, that we might get to a point in our life where we can sit down and talk a little bit easier. But, you know, we never got that chance. And so it wasn't just that he died at 62. You know, it was that also there was like this emotional distance. Which, you know, I have to say, I think he had it with my mom too. Like, I just think it was a man-woman thing. It's just who he was. Yeah. So it may have never been bridged. And that's kind of the understanding I've come to. Even though, you know, I talk to him. I still talk to him.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've said everything I've needed to say to him many times. And I ask him things sometimes. I don't really get answers, but I feel like he hears me and he knows and he sees, you know. So it's good that way. But I don't know if he would have ever been as emotional. Like, I sat there. What was painful that I sat there and you realizing there's so much I don't know about this man. He was such a quiet man. He joked around and he kept things light. But who the heck knew? He never talked about being in the war, ever. You know? It was weird. It was in World War II. He never talked about it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a whole nother.
Yeah, that's a whole nother layer, right? But people, it was a kind of a different time, you know? Like talking to my aunt, who, you know, was a little younger than her. I mean, she's 93 now, but
that's his sister.
No, sister-in-law, my mom's sister. But talking to my cousin who knew him really well, because she's in her 70s now, and my aunts, which are gone now, his sisters, but in talking to all of them, you know, afterwards, and when they got married and stuff, and none of us live nearby, so it's not like I see them a lot, but I love to get their stories, because they all loved him, you know, and I think they knew him before he went in the war, he was a different person, is the sense I get from them. And I think it closed him down, which you can certainly understand that might. He was in the Pacific there. So he saw a lot. And I think he saw a lot of mistreatment, and he hated the Japanese. But he never talked about that. Like, I wouldn't even have known that. So my brother told me. I think my brother on his deathbed got a little bit from him about the war. But I don't think this man was ever going to be capable. So it's not just that he was stolen from me at 62. It was also that, I mean, that was part of it, but part of it was that, like, how sad, you know? So, yeah. It was hard.
And then your mom is part of the sadness. Like what emotion comes up when you think about your mom?
Well, mom was a very different situation. So we had been really, really close. But when she got really ill, and I don't really know. I know I've heard people say, well, chemo changes you. She was having trouble breathing. The chemo made her heart condition worse. So they wrote down the cause of death was cancer, but really it was congestive heart failure. But, it was really from the chemo treatments. So the lack of oxygen to her brain, like she would have, and this is just in talking to my sister-in-laws that are nurses and trying to figure out what happened, it was because none of us could really figure out what was going on, but she had good days and bad days. And some days she'd be perfectly fine. And other days, like she would come over to visit me. Now I had moved, but she would get so lost finding the house. And it is a little confusing because there's two curves that look the same, and you make the right, there's a road, it's a little confusing, but she would get completely lost trying to find my house, my new house. And then she had days, I think, when it was just really hard for her to drive and remember where she was. So I do think there was something going on, and this my whole family and I have pieced together, like since then, and that was part of the healing, I have to say. But there was something much huger going on right before she died that I won't even get into right now. But we weren't close, and she wasn't being honest with me, and it was very difficult time for me because I didn't know how to reach her, like it was kind of a little bit. It was just one of those things, but I also was so overwhelmed with being a new mom and this ridiculous job that I had found myself in the middle of, and this huge project at that job, So I was working almost full time. It was supposed to be a part-time job, and worrying about my mom all the time and trying to get over there and all my days off, and it was just really hard, So, so with mom, it was hard because I think she was a lot worse than she would let on. And I think she knew that she was close to the end. Because my sister has since told me, oh, I had days where she said, I almost thought today was the day. Like, she did? Really? She never told me anything like that. So it was just interesting. Like, we all had a very different experience of her at the end. And it was really hard to piece it all together. So I didn't feel like I was on the same page as her.
The thing that, more than like the complexity of it or the unclarity of it, is the phrase you said, I didn't know how to reach her.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard.
Yeah. Well, especially because we had always been so close. So I think I'm a lot like my mother. And she certainly had my energy and love for people and enthusiasm for life. So it was really, she definitely changed. Let's put it that way. And I didn't, wasn't sure what to do with that. I mean, in retrospect, I think maybe it was a good thing, and maybe somehow, in some crazy way, I felt like the divine was preparing us for the departure, which is kind of a weird, maybe, concept, but that kind of has occurred to me, and I've it's quite possible. So it, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Keep going.
Okay. So, and so for Taya, so Taya died, so my dad died when I was young. My mother died 13 years ago. I want to say Taya died probably like 8 or 9 years ago. All right, so it's after my mother. All right, so Taya, I feel like Taya's death brought up, because she was older than me and raised 5 kids and was from Germany, so my mother was mostly German. Like she had a practicality my mother never had, but she sometimes would give me little advice the way a mother would. Like, here it was a first-time mom, right? My mother-in-law's in the Netherlands. My mother's gone. My sister's so busy you could never get a hold of her. You know what I mean? So it was so she sometimes would give you little advice about my daughter, or just about, whatever. And so it was kind of sad when she died, because, I mean, we were good friends, and I felt like I lost another mother figure. And I'm still friends with her husband. Her husband's alive. And he was trying to write a eulogy. And I called him up to see how Taya was. I didn't even know he died. He forgot to call me. He felt so bad. He had so much family to call. And he was so distraught because they were all in denial. Like, that's what was so important about Taya, was like, she was, like, I think me being her life was really good for her, because she could be honest with me. And none of her family would allow her that. And I kind of feel like sometimes as chaplains, that's what we do, right? Like, these are people that don't know us, and it doesn't matter what they say to us, it's not going to go any further, right? And so I think I really played a point in her life. And her husband, when I called it, he had no idea that I didn't know. And it was like this crazy conversation.
You didn't know that she died.
I didn't know she had died. She died like 3 days before. I mean, I wasn't like she died,
Right.
2 weeks ago or anything. So,
what was that like for her? For you, oh my gosh.
Oh,
she died.
I was like, yeah, it was weird. It was weird. I mean, I knew it was coming, so, yeah, but it was like a shock, for sure.
So yeah.
But he felt really embarrassed, so I felt bad that he felt embarrassed. I mean, didn't matter. I mean, of all the people he could have overlooked, I was one of the better ones, because it wasn't family that was going to like hold it against him for anything,
Can any of you guys think of like a word or a description that those 3 deaths have in common?
Unawareness. That might need some explanation. Just in the sense that each one seems to contain an element of something unexpected. Like your dad was young, you were young, was not necessarily planned. Your mom, yes, she had cancer, but like the finding in the parking lot kind of has a degree of unexpectedness. And your friend, the unexpected nature of like calling up and finding that she had passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say that.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah, those are all 3 are very poignant in particular and still live. Like, this is part of what it's the combination of your own personal life history and your own experience and what it means. So that's kind of the theological reflection. You can call it spiritual or just meaning making. Like, how do you make meaning? You went to, what is God? How does God prepare? What is God doing? Ultimately, is there a bigger picture? Is there a purpose to it all? And it's the combination of those two questions, kind of the emotional resonance of these parts of your life, as well as how we make sense of it. And the spiritual is what makes it ultimately. It's that human piece that we don't just go through life and we have self-awareness, we have consciousness, and that's what we help people walk through as chaplains. What is happening, and what does it mean? How is there some kind of purpose to it? We yearn for that as humans. So working through your own stuff, it shows up at the bedside, and it impacts how we're present. Right? Sometimes it can derail us. Ultimately, the goal is to get to a place where those are all resources that help us connect with whoever we're with. But when it's painful, how can pain be a resource? That can feel, we have to want it. We have to want to use it and explore it and stay there. We have to be willing to sit with it. Our own stuff in order to be of use to other people. Right? And that's kind of the CPE, what are you feeling? And let's stay there. It can feel a little bit like we're guinea pigs and, we're sticking you and, yeah. But the purpose is not I'm going to get her here. The purpose is, wow, that's real. And it is painful, but it allows you to be present and helpful to other people in their own pain. And it's a process of using that. And it's hard work. At the end of the day, that's what's really hard about one piece that's really hard about CPE and chaplain training. Kind of go there, stay there. In particular, because we don't know how it's going to help another person. So there is an uncertainty. There's an unknowing, and you have to be able to trust that we're not just masochistic.
Just what?
Masochistic.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
No, it's a good word for that.
No,
I know what you meant by that.
And that's kind of what I just did. I don't want you to feel that pain, but it's there, and given the fact that it's there, how do we acknowledge it? Because people come to the hospital with pain, and if we're going to be chaplains, it's our job, it's our role to help people be human. Does that make sense? Yeah, sorry. you can keep going with the.
Okay, but anyways, I'll just to finish that thought about that. When I found out that she died, I mean, that he felt so bad. I mean, I really was trying to make him feel better about that because it was really okay with me. I knew she was very close, but like he said, I'm trying to write a eulogy, and I don't know what to write. Like he was so spent, like he couldn't do it, And I mean, my heart went out to him, and he's like, "Can you help me with some memories?" It was so sweet, So anyway, we had a whole really beautiful conversation after that, but so it was kind of fun. It was kind of healing, and it was a nice for both of us. But once we got over the shock. So my understanding what happens when someone moves across the line from life to death, I believe we have a soul, and that is an eternal spark of the divine. This is our essence and does not die when the physical body dies. I believe a body can be kept alive artificially by machines, but when this spark departs, we've actually crossed over. After we die, I believe we are surrounded by the love of all that is, or God. Our loved ones and pets will greet us. We'll go through some sort of life review where we acknowledge our choices and shortcomings from a very impersonal, inspective, meaning non-judgmental. We know truth. We may choose to check on people we love occasionally, but that we are not floating around like clouds all day. Somehow I believe that when we're ready, we'll continue to learn in the afterlife. And I hope I will be singing with the angels, or at least get to hear them. So anyway, so the next thing was just, I told you I sent this to Eric and I had asked him some questions, and this is what he said he wanted me to explore further. So, so then I wrote, so he wanted me to try to connect some of my experience of death with patients here. So I had to really I was really glad. I mean, I knew I was going to have a really busy week, so I had to do this in advance. So I was really glad I had done this in advance because I really had to sit with it and think about it. And it was interesting. I eventually I came up with 3 examples, but it wasn't. I couldn't force it. Kind of had to be a realization. So it said there is a hospice patient at Griffin. Well, I don't know when I wrote this. She was alive earlier in the week. She may not be now. But still alive to my knowledge as I write this, that I do feel awkward around. It is obvious that family visits her. Her grandchildren's drawings are nearby, a small blue teddy bear, and also quite a few vases of flowers and cards adorn her room. Yet I have never seen any of her family. She is so thin and frail looking, and last week when I visited her, she was trying to talk but made little sense. She did ask if I could climb in bed with her. I was like, wow. Maybe she was cold or thought I was someone else. She didn't really seem to be too lucid. She could talk a little bit when I saw her last week. I had a very different experience this week. I told her I could not climb in her bed. And she reached out to me, so I held her hands and prayed with her. I felt rather inadequate, but knew I could not do much more than that. I stayed by her side for about 5 minutes until she fell back asleep. This week, I was on her floor and went to see her. She was sleeping each time I looked in, so I went and sat near her and said another prayer. Again, it seemed a bit reminiscent of my visits with my father at the end, when I felt awkward and wished I could do more. But I know that being physically present is important, and that people can feel your compassion. I mean, I don't know if she could feel my compassion this week because, she was sleeping, she wasn't really. But I think she really felt it last week. I mean, she was, I was looking in her eyes and holding her hands. And I mean, I think when she asked me if I could climb into bed with her, I mean, I think she was cold. I think she was very cold. I think she just kind of wanted that. I mean, my sense was that she wanted that comfort, which is why I took her hand.
Physical presence. What you were saying, there's
a need
for that physical.
Yep. I really felt that. And it was a powerful visit. I kind of came back here to regroup afterwards because just whoa, that was like crazy. And she's got that bed that's moving, that's so weird. And she's this tiny little thing, you don't even know where she is in the bed. And the whole thing was just a little disconcerting, You probably all have visited this woman. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. No? Okay. Anyway.
I know there were 2 hospice patients that we visited last week, but
Yeah, it probably was one of them. Little thin, older woman. I figured the blue teddy bear might, by her bed, might ring a bell. Anyway, so that was one. And last week when I was in the ED, I talked for quite a while with a really remarkable woman. She told me she'd been at the hospital many times this past year and that she was ready, which is what she was saying. But she definitely meant that she was ready to die and was unafraid to do so. Her faith was strong. She explained how she had visited her mean, miserable ex-husband. Yes, they kept in touch for a long time while he was in a nursing home. And that when he finally passed last year, she thought she would feel free and happy, but she was not. She actually missed him. They'd been married a long time, and we spoke about how perhaps it was just the routine of the visits that she missed. They had 4 children who were all wonderful to her. But of all the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, her favorite was in New Jersey, and she rarely got to see him. So she can't drive anymore, and I think that this daughter doesn't have a car. I remember thinking that if she saw him more often, she might have more of a will to live. She had numerous serious health problems, and she could not figure out why she was still alive. She wanted to die. There was another great-grandchild due in August, who's due this August, okay? And the pregnant family member kept asking this woman to please wait to meet the new baby, but she told me she would not be here by then. She was tired and ready. It was truly impressive to talk so unabashedly with someone unafraid to meet their maker. It's kind of why she called it. It did remind me of my friend Taya, who probably had less of a strong faith in an afterlife. So this wonderful visit left me missing Taya and with a bittersweet feeling as a result. But I was able to discuss the situation openly with this patient and acknowledge her feelings, and she told me she was very grateful for that. She's really an amazing person. It was so funny the way she was talking about her ex-husband. She didn't come right out and tell me he was a miserable person. She told me he wasn't a good person, but she wasn't saying why, and I didn't know why. I was thinking, is he an alcoholic? It was so funny. And she finally, he was mean to everyone, but thank God the kids turned out great, I guess, But it was just so funny. She wasn't really saying much, and it was so hard to get a sense of what was really going on. But then she just started pouring out, and she was really a neat person. And in relation to my mother's death, when I meet people who want to gloss over their symptoms and try to maintain the facade that they're still capable of living alone so as not to burden their family, it makes me think of her. And how many people do I meet here like that? I don't know. You probably have similar experiences, right? A lot of people don't want to be a burden to the kids, and it's kind of sad. There was a recent foreign film with the flip side about a family that didn't want to tell their mother, although it might have been a grandmother, that she was terminal. Mm-hmm. Did you see it?
No, but
You know the one I'm talking about?
It's with Aquafina.
It's on the shelf of the Derby Library, and every time I walk by, I think I should check that movie out because I've read the back about 5 times.
Probably.
I thought it looked good, so I think it's the grandmother.
I think it's a grandmother
I can't
too.
remember what it's called though. Something like the ending.
And she's Asian.
Like
She's
yeah,
Asian,
it's
right?
a Chinese,
Yes.
it's a Chinese
Yes, it
movie.
is. It's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Yes, it's definitely a cultural thing. But and the premise really bothered
Next time I
me.
go to the library.
It seemed, yeah, I know, right? It seemed too unfair to the patient to withhold that information. Like that, I don't know. I was going to see that with some hospice people, but it didn't really fall on a good day for me, so I was going to have to jump through hoops to get there.
I think it's streaming now too.
Oh,
Like
is
you
it?
can get it on Amazon or Hulu or whatever.
But I didn't.
Just
But I
in case
decided I
somebody
didn't want
uses
to. But I decided I didn't want to see it. because it just really bothered me, the whole premise of the movie. I heard it was good, but I didn't think I needed that right now. So my visit and verbatim on D&B reminded me of this same keeping a stiff upper lip that my mother also tried to do. B felt he needed to stay strong for his family of grown children. I mean, his kids were in their 30s and 40s, you know. It was hard to see him deny that his wife was most likely dying and struggle to keep his composure when what he really needed was to cry and let those feelings out. I had wished my mother could have been more honest with me, and I wondered if his children would have appreciated that same honesty in him. It did allow me to be compassionate for what he's going through. Somehow I had the feeling that he was afraid to give into his emotions because he might just not stop crying for hours. Like I felt like it was too big for him to deal with, kind of like. But he was rationalizing it for his kids. You know what I mean?
It's kind of sad. 5 minutes for feedback, questions, responses.
I guess I'm wondering where you saw God in some of these moments, or how you experienced the divine in some of these moments, or didn't experience the divine, or felt the divine was absent. Because there's a lot, like you tell a lot of the stories, but I'm wondering, like in the ED example, okay, so God's there, but like where did you feel God? Or where did you...
With that woman that wanted to leave, you mean?
Well, I'm saying in any of these stories, like where did you find your faith either strengthening you, or maybe your faith not being there and wondering like, oh, why am I not feeling God right now? So I guess I'm wondering like a little bit about how your spirituality, how your religiosity is connecting to these moments.
I think with my mother, I really felt like, and I felt with that woman too, who was not afraid about talking about time. Like I felt with both of them, I was really grateful that they had such a strong faith, because it gave them kind of a, they weren't fearful of dying, which I think is really helpful. It's kind of sad when you see people afraid to die. I remember I had a hospice patient once that was so afraid to die because he had killed a lot of people in war. And it was really struggling for him. He was afraid that he was going to be judged for that after his death. So that was...
I'm not answering the
I'm asking
you
about
your
you.
faith.
No, I'm getting there. I'm getting there, though. No, I'm just saying. But so what made me happy is, well, with the patients, I just felt like that was helpful for my mother, and that was helpful for this patient, and I thought that was a great thing. For me, I believe my dad was out of pain, and I actually believe, I think I told you the story, that the cat, who my mother didn't particularly like, woke up my mother, and then she heard my father and went in with my father, and he died that night. And if the cat had not waken up my mother, she wouldn't have been with my father when he died. So I totally felt that was God working through the cat. And I actually, I think that gave us all comfort. I definitely felt comfort in knowing that my dad wasn't alone when he died. I know my mother was happy to be there too. So I with his death, I didn't kind of feel like the divine was there or not in his death. I don't know why that is. So it's a hard question for me to answer. I didn't feel like the divine took Teo that morning. You know what I mean? Like I didn't feel that way in that moment. But I could answer the question is how it helped me cope with it. So that's probably... I don't know if that's what you're asking.
No,
that's
and
how I think you're
asking.
asking.
I'm asking for you, and really for our own benefit, is that when things happen, like this happened, we make meaning out of them,
Mhm.
and we think about, how did that moment reflect? How did that impact my faith? How did it cause me to grow in my faith, or challenge my
Mhm.
faith? And so I was just looking to hear a little more, not necessarily about like the instant they died,
Mhm. Yeah.
but in that experience,
Mhm.
how did that help you discern
Well,
the power or the strength of your faith, or maybe the places where you were like, I'm not quite sure how I think about that as a faithful person.
with my dad it was hard because I was away. I wasn't even living at home that summer, so it was really hard for me to get home to spend time with him. So then I would struggle to get home to spend time with him, and I would feel like it wasn't very meaningful time, and maybe I could have, like in retrospect, it probably would have been good if I could have prayed a little bit more for guidance in being with him, but I wasn't there at that point in time. I was working in, I don't even, Vermont, I think, New Hampshire or something, that summer. And I was praying for a strength, and I was praying for the way out of the job. Like I was really torn. It was really hard because I was torn because I had made a commitment to do this job, and these people were relying on me, but I really felt like I should be home with my dad and be there for my mom. And so it was really hard. So I kept praying for like a solution. And of course the solution didn't come to after my dad died, which is really sad. So that was tough. So I kind of felt like it didn't feel like God was there so much for me right then in the midst of it. I do feel that God was very much there afterwards, because it was a really tough time afterwards, after he was gone, and we really struggled financially, and we were just praying for help because we desperately needed it, and everything in the house broke, everything. I mean, you name it. The well pump broke. You name it. Major expenses happened in the house, and we were just praying, to get through it, and it helped a lot there because it really was miraculous the way things worked out, how people really came to our aid, people we weren't even close to. So that was helpful. And for me at the time, I felt that because, I felt that my dad was still alive and he was healthier, and I felt like he could hear me. It helped me to know that I could pray to him and talk to him more openly. That I felt that he was open to it now in a way he wasn't when he was alive. So that was helpful to me. So I don't know where God is in that, but that's where it was for me. So you might say God's not there, but I think God is, because I felt like those little miracles that happened between the cat and all the neighbors pulled together in the well pump and something with the septic. I don't remember what happened. Something major with septic too. It was just crazy. Like everything was breaking down. With Taya, I felt like God was there because I kind of felt like God was working through me to help her. And it was really beautiful because I felt like we got a lot closer. Like it added a whole other dimension to our friendship, which is really kind of beautiful. So.
I'm sorry, I have to.
Oh yeah, you have to leave.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. There's a lot of depth there. So thank you. Everybody's got a theological reflection?
I have to print
I have to print
mine.
mine.
So we're continuing without you? Is that,
Yeah.
or should we do a verbatim?
Why don't you do a verbatim? So I don't, because I think I'd like to be here for the whole. And I know I saw yours, and you sent me one too, right?
A verbatim, yes.
or well, I've
verbatim.
sent you both verbatims and
Um,
theological reflection.
And I don't know which of you has presented more verbatims.
It's probably roughly equal.
Yeah. And do both of you have it ready to?
I need to print mine.
Do you have yours
I
ready?
have one.
I mean,
But you
can print-
if
you
you're
can go print
stepping out, could we just get
We just do
everything
that.
printed out? And
Yeah, go for it.
that way we're
And then-
just ready for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Why don't you do that? I don't think I'll be too long.
Yeah, that way everybody can print everything out and we'll be all set for whatever.
I'm just gonna print one verbatim though, right? Because I have two, but I
Yeah.
don't know that.
Yeah, we won't do one each.
Okay, good.
I shouldn't be too long.
Okay.
Good.
So should we take 10, you think?
I need to email things to myself in order to print them.
I'm gonna sign in on like, if you wanna email
Yeah,
me something,
can I-
then yeah.
Okay.
Actually, Laura, if we're just doing that, can I email?
Yeah, email me.
Is it your?
Who's going to make copies?
It's kisstartl@gmail.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because as you know, we
Can
can't do
you
email
make-
here.
During the, it's not my Yale email, it's kisstartl@gmail.com. Alright, wait a minute.
Kissed her, so her last name, K-I,
Capital or small?
lowercase, S, T.
Is that it?
No, it's her last name. So
Okay, so it's not that one that I have. No. You have to put it in. While you guys are
and she
printing.
said L. Kissed
L,
her,
yeah, L at Gmail,
And
yeah.
then just L.
I'm gonna go
at
grab
gmail.com.
something to drink. Does anyone else want anything? Very good.
You just forgot the at sign.
Oh, it's so funny because there's one other death of a friend of mine that died of car accident that I totally felt God was there, but it didn't feel that way with these two. Does anyone else want anything? I'm gonna run down and get
Nope.
Just-
I'm gonna.
Okay, I'll be back.
Oh, but wait a minute. No, I did this one.
Take this. Hello there. How are you today?
Doreen, there wasn't anything attached.
I know, I
Okay.
just realized that that's what happened. Sorry.
I hate when that happens.
Okay, did that one come through?
Oh, yeah, I know you. Good to see you. Getting out of trouble? No. No? Why should we?
Sharing someone else's secrets.
Those two.
Yes, I
Oh, okay, perfect. Good, because first my iPad was like telling me your email address didn't exist. Also, I do mine very, very differently. Oh, that's a big one.
No, I know. There was like a big chunk there.
These were the notifications, just like, I'm not really doing it anymore.
Yeah.
Have fun. So yeah, hopefully it makes them too active.
Yeah.
That's a work site.
I know, you're funny. I saw that. I was like, oh, where's the work excited?
I guess when I think theological reflection, I think about like how does theology impact
I wrote for the wrong audience.
like legit. Like if I'm just gonna block out one letter. Because I write these quickly and then I don't proofread them.
I mean, not that I'm not super worried about security, but I feel like do you mind just staying here until someone gets back?
Oh no, that's fine.
Given the needle situation and everything.
Right. No, they're making copies, and I was just staying here to watch stuff.
Oh, do you want to go somewhere?
Yeah, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
I'm gonna go over to the copier now.
Here, I'll wait here. It's fine.
But
Good.
Laura said it was probably, and I agreed with her. It's probably better that somebody
Yeah, I agree.
wait here.
Yes, because we all have our purses here.
Two.
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna come get my coat too.
Okay. Did you get your coat?
Yep.
Okay.
Great,
I
thanks.
can shut this, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Trying to get my taxes done so I can apply for financial aid by March 15th. It's like crunch time.
I know. I just started looking at places for next year, and a lot of them, the deadlines have already passed.
No, really?
Well, okay, God.
I
You're
know.
gonna have to clue me in what's going on here. I don't know how, because you have to write about this experience, and it's not over yet, and Eric has to put in something. I don't know how that's gonna work, but it'll work out somehow, the way it's supposed to.
I know. I feel I'm feeling that big time too. Anyways. But the good news is I woke up with inspiration because there's something that I need to do, which was really good. So I wrote it down real quick.
Is there a stapler in here?
I believed there was, but it was. Oh, maybe it's in that room.
Okay.
I think there's one in that room. There's one
What?
somewhere along here.
What, stapler?
Yeah.
I have it right here.
Oh, you have it. Oh.
Oh, okay. So
I should staple
I've
mine,
So I was
too.
like, I know I've seen a stapler
Okay.
lying around here.
I should probably staple mine too.
That was so efficient having you guys just send me everything.
Yeah,
Worked
it
out
made so
really
much
well.
more sense.
I really appreciate it, because otherwise, I got one thing off and then I can believe it.
Because otherwise we'd all have to log into our email addresses.
I know, it's just quicker, right, to be able to do it that way.
And then since the Yale one doesn't work here, I'm using like a tertiary email address that
Exactly.
The
I really
yellow
only use in the summer.
I think it's a security.
It's a security
thing.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, sorry, I gotta figure out. Holy.
It feels warm in here now.
Yes,
It is warm in here.
Yeah.
This didn't work.
I don't know, it always seems rather iffy.
Okay, all right, I think we should start and not wait for him though,
Yeah.
on something, because otherwise the day's gonna be gone.
Agreed. Agreed. When you're done with the stapler, can I use it quick?
Am I stepping your way?
No, you're fine. I was just trying to reduce the amount of light coming in here so it doesn't get hotter.
Did you turn it down?
Yeah. Could turn it down even further. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, now it's at like 60 so should stop from here.
Okay, so
Liz,
keep
you
going.
have a verbatim?
I do.
Alright, because I only have my theological.
Where we can.
Alright, why don't we do you then? Since Gina was just on the hot seat, we'll let you have that seat. And I have to tell you, I just walked by the respiratory therapist director's office. She has a stand-up desk.
I know, I saw that too.
Oh, okay, I thought of you immediately. I thought,
When I worked in an office, I had to stand up there.
did you? I had never seen one.
I have
mean,
one
I've
at-
heard
I
of
have one
them
at
and I've seen
home.
them advertised,
Oh my.
but looked phenomenal.
Yeah, I still have all the
They're
stuff for
great.
it so that, if I end up in a place that's bigger than what I have now, if I'm in a parsonage with 4 bedrooms, I'll get myself a office with a stand-up desk.
I'm just gonna pass this out and I'm gonna grab a drink of water. As I'll be right back.
Okay. Thank you.
This one's for Garrett.
Tails. I was trying to remember what this person's email was.
Here it is.
Don't take this personal. I want to be able to see
Yeah.
where my water is so I don't grab it blind. I feel like.
I don't know why my printer was sending everything crooked. So, my apologies, everything I printed was crooked.
I'm not even a little, just.
Okay.
Okay. I'll be the chaplain.
Okay.
I'll be a patient.
I will admit the patient has a lot of talking and the chaplain doesn't have as much talking.
Laura just agreed, so.
Got it.
If you need me to be a narrator or
There's some,
something,
yeah,
I can
there's
do that.
definitely
You've got
some
the
narrative
parenthesis.
Narration,
Narrative.
okay.
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 You understand?
Ready?
Oh,
Okay.
wait, well, let's start.
Okay.
Yes.
So the reason I selected this visit is this patient was challenging to work with, both due to both his personality and his theology. I felt like he overpowered me with his incessant talking and refusal to let me get a word in edgewise. So there's just the sort of demographic-ish information.
Okay.
82-year-old Caucasian male, about 40 minutes on the second floor.
Okay.
So it was around 7:20 p.m. and most of the newly admitted patients were with doctors. I noticed this patient hadn't been seen for 4 days, so I decided to check in on him. Usually I don't visit patients after 7:30, so I can chart and leave on time. So my plan was hopefully to keep it brief-ish. The patient, however, had other ideas. So the patient is in bed resting. He seems to be watching television, but in the semi-darkness of his room, it's hard to see if he's actually focused on the screen.
The chaplain knocks.
Hello, TG.
Yes?
Eyes still focused away from me, and I can now see he is staring at the TV screen, which is an image of tropical fish swimming in the ocean.
My name is Liz. I am a chaplain here. We try to.
Patient cuts me off.
I'm meditating on God. One of the nurses showed me this channel, and I watch it and think about God. Look at those fish.
Turns back to the screen.
It is a very calming image. How do you experience God as you contemplate it?
Well, you only need a space about this big
Gestures box about the size of the TV.
to see God. I'll tell you, all these people going around like this
Mine's person looking down into her cell phone.
just don't get it.
What don't they get?
God isn't down there. God is there.
Points at TV.
Back in my day, people didn't sit in the parking lot on their phones with the cars idling. They actually got out and went into the store. But now things are different.
Mime's person looking down to his cell phone again.
People do use their phones a lot these days. I'm curious, though, about how these images
Points to the TV.
help you encounter God.
Image on screen has changed to a snowy mountain.
There's God. Isn't it beautiful? I'll tell you something. Science has proven God exists. I'm sorry.
It might provoke a little laughter at times.
Science has proven God exists. The scientists say so. They used to say we were made out of atoms, but now the scientists know they were wrong. There aren't atoms making up you or me. It wasn't the Big Bang or anything, because something had to exist first. Science says so. I'll tell you what. They say we're made of photons. All these photons, and they can look at them and tell us what we're made of. The scientists can look at your sweater and tell exactly what materials are in it. It's because of the photons. Just like in Genesis, God said, "Let there be light." The photons are the light. So now science knows it was wrong, and it's because of the photons.
Chaplain tries to enter conversation to explore the idea of light, but patient ignores Chaplain entirely.
You're made of photons. I'm made of photons. We're all just made of light, and now the scientists can't deny it anymore. You know what? I think of God as light. God's just a big light around us. When I walk around, I like to look at people and see God's light. Then I smile at them because God's light is there, but they're too busy doing this.
Mime's person looking down at his cell phone.
Wow, I'm
Chaplain tries again to respond to patient's idea of God as light, but patient continues talking.
I'll tell you something else. I think of things in images, you know? Images. Like God. God is a light image, not a person or a thing. Like that.
Points at the screen, which is now showing an image of trees.
That's God. Images, pictures, light.
Chaplain is a bit baffled and feeling like she's losing track of the flow of the conversation.
You know, they asked me to teach at the high school. I said I didn't know anything about that, but I could try. I mean, I knew engineering, so I could teach math. They gave me the special kids, the ones who couldn't do math. No wonder they couldn't. Those math books made no sense. So I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help them see the space between numbers and math. The images, you know? And I did, and they all got it. And then the school came to me and they said they wanted to use my tests for the state certification. So I said, I don't care, do whatever you want. So they used my tests for the state and the town and everything. I mean, what do I know? Then, you know, I used to go around to all the churches and go to services. Everybody knew me. You know that round church? I went there, then I started going to all the services all around, and people got to know me. So somebody said to me one day, you gotta go to New Milford. And I said, why do I gotta go to New Milford? He said, because of the healings. So I went over and I met the healer. He's this guy who was really sick and going to die, and then he prayed and God healed him. Now he heals everyone else. He has this healing room, and we all get in a circle and we pray, and people are healed. But he always reminds us that it's God who heals. We just do the motions. There was this woman. She had a perfectly good husband and kids, but then she decided to leave them for a woman, and then she got the gay disease.
Chaplain tries to enter the conversation to clarify the meaning, but patient just keeps talking.
And she was so scared. All her nodes were gone, all of them. And she didn't want to tell her parents, so I said, you gotta go to the healings. And she went and she was healed. Not a thing wrong anywhere. And it's true, the doctors at New Milford Hospital say so. They started coming to see the healings and they were amazed. All these doctors coming to the healings, and then the rabbis started to come too. They wanted to get in on it. There was this one guy who had black lungs totally gone. The doctor said that was the end. But he went to the healings. We laid our hands on him and prayed. The healer said it was up to God, and he was cured. The doctors at New Milford Hospital said his lungs were as clear as a baby's, and it's all because of the healings. It's all true because the doctors say so. But now the healer's sick, and he said God told him it was going to be a long, painful end, so he's ready to suffer.
what?
Chaplain tries to ask something about the kind of personal healing the patient might want for himself, but the patient keeps talking.
And I'll tell you something else. Then they said, you gotta go to Ohio. And I said, why? It's because of the visions. So this friend of mine picks me up and we go to Ohio to this baseball stadium. and we're all praying and crying out to Jesus, and then somebody says, "There she is," and the Virgin Mary appears in the sky, and she turns all the trees orange. The trees were orange. And then another time we all prayed, and the sky lit on fire. It was burning.
Chaplain glances at the clock and realizes it's fast approaching 7:45 and begins to try to find a way to exit.
God was burning the sky, all that light.
Incredulously,
Well, that is quite something, but
patient interrupts.
So the miracles kept happening, and the healings and all, and my friend's going to pick me up, and we're going to Ohio to see the miracles. Look at that.
Points to the TV, which is now showing a sunset.
There's God. God is there. Look at that beauty.
Chaplain really is looking for a way to exit, given the time and random directions of the conversation.
well, T, I'm going to have to.
Patient interrupts.
Want to hear something else? All the doctors in New Milford knew it. They knew it was all true. They said it themselves.
Patient interrupted by the announcement that it was 8 p.m. and quiet hours were in effect. In a relieved manner now that there is finally a way to exit the room.
Well, it is quiet hours now, so I need to go and let you get some rest. Would you like to pray before I leave you?
Yes.
Dear God, you are the light of the world, and we know that in your light we see light. May T know your light and experience a peaceful evening. Amen.
Thank you so much. You know what?
Chaplain really doesn't want to know since it is past 8 p.m. now.
I was feeling kind of lonely, and then you came in, and now I feel so much better. I'm going to go back to thinking about God.
Settles himself to focus back on the TV.
Gotta think about God when I'm here.
Well, I hope your contemplation goes well. Have a good evening.
Quickly exits the room before patient starts talking again.
I have not had one like this.
I know exactly who this is. I've had some very crazy conversations with this man as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And
Just so
this
you know.
was-
It's not
And
just
like I've probably forgotten parts of it too.
Oh yeah, oh I'm sure, because he's all over the
I
place.
can only imagine, but I have not had anybody like this, so it's fascinating.
This was very entertaining.
Doesn't he repeat himself a lot too? Like you didn't show that in here so much, but
I don't.
you showed it a little
I
bit.
don't think he would like emphasize certain things, like the doctors in New Milford Hospital say so.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was
yeah,
really
yeah,
big
yeah.
with him, or like the scientists say so.
Yeah, so that's why I
it
knew
was
who it
very
was.
like emphatic on certain, and there was more miracles, sky turning
mhm.
orange stuff that this is like.
I know about all this stuff going on in Ohio. That's where I'm from. Jeez.
I
Could have seen the Virgin Mary in the sky.
You could have seen the
Yes.
sky on fire.
Yeah.
You sure
This
left in the
sounds
sunset.
This
So
was
your reflection.
So my
is-
reflection. Once this patient got talking, he did not want to stop. I could not get a word in edgewise because he would interrupt me to keep talking. Perhaps this was because he was lonely, but I also wondered if there was a bit of mansplaining at the beginning, particularly in his discussions of what he called science. Photons. I had wanted to ask him about his conceptions of God as light further, and also to ask what type of healing he might be looking for. Since so much of the conversation focused around healings, I wondered if perhaps he was looking for particular healing for himself. He didn't permit me the opportunity, though, and I didn't want to fight him in order to press the question. Perhaps I could have pushed further, but that seemed to be contrary to the idea of ministry of presence. Over time, it got harder to listen to him, as to me his stories about healings and visions became increasingly difficult to take seriously. His tone also got more frenzied as the conversation continued, and I began to wonder if he was making things up. I was annoyed at the end of the conversation, in part because I felt like I had been shut down, and also because it was after 8 p.m. It had been a long day, and this was not a great way to end it. I do think, however, that the patient was satisfied with the care he received. Theological reflection. Since I tend to think of God as light, or a generally luminous presence, I found myself at times resonating with the patient's descriptions of God. I also encounter God in nature quite regularly, so the idea that contemplating images, icons to use more religious language, of nature to reflect on God made sense to me. As the patient continued, however, his accounts of healings and visions began to make me feel skeptical. While I believe God can heal and appear via visions, the stories this patient was telling seemed fantastical. I wondered if he was part of some sort of cult or very extremist Christian group. I don't think there were any ethical issues. future areas, none. I was curious enough after this conversation to check if New Milford Hospital actually exists, and it does. So maybe part of this patient's story was rooted in reality. He was just so emphatic that, like, and I don't know New Milford, and so I was like, I wonder if is there actually such a place, and there is a New Milford Health Center. So,
Oh yeah.
Around church.
I'm not sure what he was referring to there. I think there's a church somewhere around here that is round.
I'm sure there must be.
Yeah.
Maybe Eric knows.
That's interesting. Like, I feel like we definitely talked about God, and we definitely talked about faith. So I felt like on that level, like it was a sort of spiritually relevant and fulfilling conversation. But I really did feel like he never let me get a word in edgewise. Like, I'd open my mouth and he'd just be like, let me tell you something else. And just sort of keep spewing these stories.
But I think you did what was needed, because you didn't try to direct him in a conversation. You let him direct the conversation, and that's what he wanted. And at the end, he thanks you because that's what he needed. And although we may or may not believe everything he said, he, had some realities, like you said, vision of God as light, and seeing God in the, I've seen that TV loop that goes on. A lot of hospice patients have it.
Yeah.
And it is. It's very calming, very beautiful on the TV. They can put it on this loop, and it's,
And it did.
So I think, I think that's the piece I've had the hardest part learning is you can't have an agenda. So, you felt like your agenda should have been to, get in there, but I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, Eric's not here to correct me, but any of you feel free. But, I think that you did what this person needed, and what they got out of it was what they needed.
Yeah, I think for me the turning point really came in P11, where he says, like, you know what, I was feeling lonely and now I feel so much better. Like, because I think if it wasn't for that, I would have the question that I think you kind of presented as, like, what was I doing here? But I think that's we have to let the patient speak for themselves of, like, that they, upon reflection at the end of this random conversation, they felt better. So.
And, I think there's a part of us that wants to challenge somebody who says things that seem,
Yeah, I wasn't going to challenge his science because I just didn't want to get into that.
How about his miracles, though?
But I did want it. I don't know that I wanted to challenge them. I don't think I would have come out and said, I don't believe that.
Well,
but I think I would have.
There are other ways of challenging them.
I think
That's
I would
pretty
have
right.
probed them a little bit further. Like, what were you praying? Like, what were you praying for? Or, like, what brought all these people to Ohio to a baseball stadium? Would be a better way to phrase that, but I also know that I probably would have come across as judgmental no matter what I asked.
Yeah, I don't know how you would.
Because I just have a hard
I
time
thought your
believing.
question you wanted to ask in C6 when you wanted to ask about God is light and how they.
Oh yeah,
I thought that was a really good one.
Yeah.
And that's a good way of, inquiring and focusing on that.
Well, because as I said, I often experience God as in terms of light. So I was really,
Me too.
legitimately like, I wonder how he articulates this.
Right, but that was not questioning.
No, that's not
anything he was
questioning,
telling you.
exactly.
That's,
Mm-hmm.
asking for a little more in-depth of his perception of something that you too,
Yeah.
can told.
But later in the conversation, if I had started asking about like these visions in Ohio or I think I would have said something. And in the prayer, I actually tried to be very careful not to only comment on light, because I was worried that if I said something,
Yeah, it'd be tempting to say, I hope you have your own healing or something.
Right, and I was worried that I could accidentally kind of portray an agenda by saying something like, I don't know, I hope the hope something happens with the healer, right? So I was like, I'm just going to keep this brief, and I'm going to keep it. We both can resonate with the idea of God as light, so let's just.
Yeah, I think that was a nice prayer.
Did you at times feel like you were in your head somewhere else and not totally attuned to him?
I actually felt that I was very present in this conversation, mostly because it was so fascinatingly odd at times.
That you had to stay.
That I had to stay.
Yeah. All right.
I've felt that too. When you have a patient who's like rambling, I don't really tune out because it's like I have no idea where this is going. I'm just along for the ride.
Like when he jumps from talking about God and Genesis and photons, and then he like launches into this thing about teaching math to
That was
kids.
That was kind of cool.
I was wondering, but in the conversation that
To be in that class.
it was happening, I was like, where are we going to end up? And then when he was talking about the math, I was starting to think, okay, well, if this keeps going for a long time, I'm going to try to see if I can nudge us back towards God is light or Genesis or something. But he kind of got, and I'm sure in his head there was a transition between teaching and like going to these churches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe there wasn't a transition in it, but there was no written transition. But somehow those connected for him, which brought us into the vision area of New Milford.
See, I've actually talked to this patient at least twice.
I'm missing out on all of these.
Oh, don't worry. I believe he's still here.
I think he's still here.
He's still here, and let me tell you something. So
He will talk.
yeah, and you'll remember this verbatim, and you will know this is the man. So the question is this: he has been in the hospital a long time. Did you look at lengths of stay? He's been here like 40-something days, or probably 50 now. They're probably in the 50s now.
I don't know what's.
I had asked one of the chaplains about that because they said, I just talked to so-and-so again. I said, oh yeah, he's a lovely man. He goes, oh yeah, I talk to him every few days, and he's harmless, a really nice guy, but I couldn't remember who it was.
Did you say harmless?
Yes. Well, you'll see why, because this is a little out there.
A little odd out there. But.
Well, I don't. But the funny thing is, so the other chaplain had said something to me about he's homeless. He has no place to go.
He did.
But he must have some sort of insurance.
It didn't make it into the verbatim, but at one point, because I couldn't for the life of me figure out how it had entered the conversation, he did say something like, I was staying at Spooner House, but by choice.
Okay.
And it didn't make it in here, mostly because I could not for the life of me figure out where
Or when he said it.
when he
yes.
said it.
Does he have one of the New Testament books?
Not when I was there.
The first time I visited him was a long time ago. It was probably 3 months ago. It was probably like, in the first month of seeing patients. And I don't really even remember what his room looked like.
I think he's moved rooms.
Oh, but that
Because
could very well be.
He was tucked, when I went to visit him, he was way back in the corner of 2 North B. Like it was almost like he had been forgotten back there.
Out the door. No, I know.
And it was just a very dark corner. And he had the screen pulled. And so when I went in, it was just a very dark corner.
Well, the thing is that the first time I talked to him, yes, he gets very worked up as he's talking to you, right? And
he seems very sane when you first sit down and talk to him. And then, but he talks about the healings and New Milford, and he went in and in and in, but he kept kind of repeating himself and always telling a slightly different story about a different person coming to New Milford. I don't know how he got to New Milford, what he was doing in New Milford. Like there's a lot of non sequiturs in his stories that he tells. And at first, I really didn't know if this guy was like should have been in CP South. I remember thinking that when I was talking to him.
As the story goes on, I forgot what I said here. I just start to get a little maybe annoyed.
Yeah, because you can't get away from him.
You also can't figure out like what is true and what isn't true.
Yes.
And why he's even there, because he does come across as very, like, when this conversation started, he came across as very collected and put together, and then it kind of spiraled into this thing. And the other thing that didn't end up in here that I'm just remembering is as I'm walking out the door, he says to me, "Has that light always been in the hallway?" There's like a light fixture in the hallway. I sort of said, "Well, never noticed it before, but yes, I would presume it's always been there." And then he just got like very fixated on this light fixture in the hallway. And then they were turning the lights off, so eventually, it went off, and I was like, "Going home. I'm leaving now."
How would you describe how you think, what his perception of the contract with you? Like, what does he think you're there for? How does he think you can help him?
It's a little hard to know in the sense that he cuts me off very quickly before I can kind of explain what chaplains do. But he does, I say I'm a chaplain, and he does connect that with God. So there is that assumption made.
You're the one who it's safe to download the God stuff.
Right. And so he makes that connection very quickly, which is what launches him into the rest of the verbatim. So I guess I would say I think he saw my role as the one where he could unload about God, or the person he could share about God. And I think he probably might have made some of that his faith caused him to make some assumptions about what I might see as valid or useful in faith. Just by getting into all the healings, he gets into so much detail about these healings that it would seem to me that you would only share some of that if you felt like the person you were talking to was going to think that was valid. If you thought that, and this is assuming that you're sort of a thinking and reflecting person, but he shared that because he felt that I wasn't going to perhaps judge him for that. Whereas if I had opened my mouth, or maybe if I hadn't been a religious person, I might have said, "Well, this is utter nonsense."
Yeah. And how does your faith history / tradition, is there any overlap?
I've always been skeptical of kind of like miracle healing talk. Not because I don't believe God can heal. I do believe that God can heal. But when it comes to like the way this is set up, the idea that like there's a healer who gathers all these people, and no matter how many people show up, everybody's getting healed. I wonder if I have less trouble with the healings as I do with like the visions of trees turning orange and things like that. But you know what's actually challenging to me is that on some level, like I do believe that things like that can happen, in the sense that that's why people,
Julian of Norwich.
Right, and that's why there are shrines, and that's like people are healed by God. But this man's story made me suspicious / incredulous. because it seemed a little cultish to me that like this healer was gathering all these. Now it's going to sound bad because literally you could say that about Jesus too. Jesus was a healer that was gathering people around him. But the idea that like all these doctors are starting to come and these rabbis are coming and these ministers are coming and like everybody's verifying the healings, it started to sound so grandiose that I thought I should have read about it in the paper or something like that if it was as.
How would the rest of you, what pieces of your own tradition, faith history, overlaps or doesn't? Like, how does it compare to Liz's? If you saw this patient, you did.
So I went most of my life not really believing, like, rationalizing when we read about the healing miracles of like, well, it was probably medical, but they just explain them as healing miracles. Until my first year at divinity school, I was in a prayer reflection group with someone who shared a story about, I think it was their uncle and a healing miracle that had taken place, and that person's story in particular, but then also just like that relationship, it sparked in me like a total change in the way that I think about miracles, and then thinking that healing miracles do occur and can occur, now. So.
What tradition was that person?
They were Pentecostal. So much more in line with their tradition and not in line with my tradition. The UCC, most people are not believing in healing miracles. But I guess so that's the difference. Whereas I feel like I can get on board more with the healing miracle part of it rather than the sky stuff and the trees turning orange. I'm less likely to feel inclined to believe that than I am about the healing. I can believe in the healing miracles, I guess. So.
Now I know New Milford, right? I mean, it's
And
not that far from
couldn't-
Danbury.
I couldn't even place where New Milford was when I was listening to this.
I have been there many, many times. I used to work right near. I used to drive right through it on the commute. So I know New Milford Hospital, and I laughed when you said you wanted to see if New Milford even existed, because I kind of felt the same way you did. Like I should Google this healing house. This brown healing house. He was describing the whole house to me, on one visit I had with this guy. And I wanted to Google it too because it sounded like it should have been in the news, right? I had the same reaction. But the first time I visited him, I guess I wondered like if the guy was really sane. The second time when I visited him, I just went to write some notes about a patient I had seen on the floor. So I went over to that little corner where the fish is.
Mm-hmm.
And there was like a sitting area, right? Like a living room. And he was over there. It was a gorgeous sunny day, and he was in the corner staring out at the clouds. And so I didn't even know who it was. I just went over and I stood there next to him, and we started talking. And when he started talking, I realized I had seen him before, and I was like, wow, he's still here. Then I figured out who it was later. But he seemed much more normal to me, but he didn't want me to go. It was that same thing that you kept experiencing here.
He did not want you to go.
Yeah, I was trying to, find an X6. I'm starving. My stomach's growling, and it was the same thing. Like you couldn't get away, and he even called after me. Oh, it's too bad you didn't get here a little sooner because Mother Teresa and a couple of my friends were here. You just missed them. And then I was like, okay, well, now I really know the guy's out there. But like he's a very sweet man, and he does have faith. And I kept thinking, maybe he just has visions. So maybe the sky on fire and the art, like those, they could be visions, right? I mean, I don't really know.
I just want to hear from everybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe in miracles. Had one. So And I believe in healing masses as Catholics. You know, not every diocese even, I don't think. But there are places where healing masses are very important. And I've had people ask me, are they real? Are they not? And I feel God works in mysterious ways. So when someone has invited me to go to a healing mass, I've always gone. If nothing else, I find it very soothing, very comforting. Have I made pilgrimages to different places, Lourdes and, Fatima, and yes, all of them, all the ones in Ireland, because, a lot of them, I believe the things happened. Are they still happening? I don't know. I don't have that kind of insight. I just feel that, God can work through children and through priests and through, the least of the least. And, plenty of people feel Mother Teresa, did miracles. But I don't have a problem with that. As far as a vision, I think certainly there have been many people who have had visions. Do I believe that in Ohio the stadium filled up? And no, because that's our lifetime, and because the media is so quick to get on all of that we would have heard of it. But maybe making that grandiose comes from something that's much tinier, but within him. But I think I believe in most things these days. And I feel comfortable. I mean, not that I would hop on a plane to Ohio for the next stadium, gathering, but if you said to me, I'd like to make a visit to this church in New Milford, do you want to go with me? I'd probably say yes. Just, where I'm at.
So it's a church. Did you say which?
My
It's around
understanding,
church.
well, so
I
my
thought it was
understanding,
a
it's
round church.
a healing place is a house of some sort.
Okay.
There's a round church somewhere that he thought that I would know of. I think the way this was framed is what made me more skeptical about it, in the sense that when you start, like, with the starting about science and saying we're not made of atoms, we're made of photons, my sort of first thought is like, I'm pretty sure we're made of atoms.
Well, and there was the gay disease in there too. So
Yeah.
And
disregard
that kind of shut me.
Yeah. So the reason I asked about contract, like and anytime you're with a patient and they just keep talking and you can't jump in, it's also a question of authority. Like part of the contract that it sounds like he had was that you're there to witness. He's giving a witness, you're witnessing, and that's part of that tradition. If there's a miracle, you share it, and there's a faith received in hearing it. There's the whole tradition of witnessing. But at what point? So that's one tradition. As chaplains, what is the role of a chaplain? We all come from different traditions, so a chaplain who comes from that tradition will be able to jump right into that vocabulary of witnessing, right? And you've got some of that evangelical, which is different from the spiritual gifts, like miracle stuff, but it's you can see that there's types of vocabulary of faith, and sometimes they're comfortable, sometimes they're really not comfortable. So much of that is the assumptions we come with, or just the culture we're from. So how do you individually, with integrity, join people in their walk? Right? He's making meaning, and then where are the limits of that as well? Like maybe he's not all there, and then that can interact with maybe his medical need. Maybe he's homeless and there's a whole lot more going on just really needs attention because he's invisible, or there's medical stuff. And how do you, like, hearing each of you come with your own tradition? How do you hear and be present without the automatic reaction? Like, oh, I don't like this guy, or get me out of here, or and then where's your authority? What it sounds like he knocked you off your authority in some ways, and a lot of patients do in a lot of different ways. Would you characterize it that way, or
I think
not?
that often after I walk in a room and introduce myself, I'm inclined to let the patient talk for a while after that, to kind of see, but to see where they're at. So I tend to walk in, introduce myself, ask how they're doing or what they're feeling, and then kind of leave it, and see where they run with it. Unless I get dead silence or like, well, I'm in the hospital. What do you mean? How do I feel? And then I'll take it further. But I tend to give them that space. And usually that works decently well. I think that perhaps this person's personality was that if you give him an inch, he was going to take a mile. So that by giving that space, yeah, maybe in some ways I did a hand over authority, in a way that usually works out, but with someone like this, is just going to go with it. But at the same time, I also really didn't feel as the conversation went on that I should have like leapt on top of his story to ask a question, because it felt like he had a flow going on, and at certain points to sort of leap into that flow would have just been challenging. But maybe I had just adjusted myself to listening at that point. Was just going with it.
I wonder, Liz, how the visit might have ended differently because a big part of this is, you said, like, it's 7:20, you were going and hoping this was just going to be a short visit, and the way it ended was because the announcement came 8 o'clock visiting hour. So how might you have escaped the situation? Like, how might you have ended the conversation if that hadn't ended it for you? If it was 5 o'clock and, okay, now it's 6 o'clock and I really need to end this visit with this guy.
Yeah, and that's, I think, another reason why I did present it, because I think I'm not very good at ending conversations sometimes. I think that I kind of let them just keep going as long as the person wants them to. Sometimes even when I'm like, I need to go to the bathroom, my stomach hurts, whatever.
What keeps you from saying anything to get out of the room?
It very much depends. I guess I often feel like, my role here is to listen, to be present, and as long as that's continuing to be helpful, or I somehow perceive it to be helpful, I'm going to stay. I'm not always good at endings, and I know that from my own life. Like, if I'm running a meeting and I say it's going to be done at 12:30, I sometimes have a tendency to like let it hang till 12:40. And I'm learning in my own life that if I say it's going to be done at 12:30, it has to be done at 12:30, because that's honoring other people's time. But I think that sometimes, because there isn't a set time limit to a visit with a patient, that it's easy for me to just let it go until it reaches a natural course. That said, I have had visits where I feel like we're done, it's not going anywhere, and I will say, thank you for sharing your story, thank you so much for whatever, or would you like to pray? We haven't prayed already, and then use that as an out. For this patient, I don't really know what I would have done if it had been 5 o'clock and it was running on 6:15, and I was like, I need to. I think I would have just felt bad about it, but I would have just said, "Okay, T, I need to leave. I'm so sorry," and done it that way. But I would have felt leaving the room like I had robbed the patient of an opportunity to express themselves. But I know I would have felt that way because there have been some visits where I have had to give it a hard end, and I've left feeling like I cut off perhaps something that they wanted to share.
Have you guys felt that for yourselves?
That I cut it off.
Like having a hard time ending, or
No, I usually just say, well, I'm going to stop you right there.
how about you, Jean?
I like that. Okay, we gotta write that down.
Because I would just feel so guilty saying that.
I know,
I
I
had
know.
one
I
last
do too.
night. I had a young guy who just was going on and on and on. Very nervous about surgery today and stuff. And, so I just said, well, I used his name. I'm going to stop you right there because what I'm hearing is that you're very nervous about tomorrow. And what if we pray together about that?
Mhm.
Because I felt like, he was going on and on about his dog and his friend and his landlord. None of it,
Mhm.
was getting to anything that
Mhm.
felt constructive.
I would say the second part of what you said, because when you said, I'm going to stop you right there, that felt to me like very jarring. But then to hear
I
you,
thought you'd approve of it,
But-
Miss.
but
I'm,
let me say the next part, which is when you said what I'm hearing is, because that's very like pastoral care, is reiterating back to someone. And so I think pairing those two together is great. I'm going to stop you right there. This is what I'm hearing. Because what I'm hearing to me, that's the key part, is you're saying to someone, I'm hearing you,
But I
and
think
we're done.
well, what I find is I have to say the word, I'm going to stop you right there, because otherwise I feel like people talk over me.
Yeah, that's fair.
Just to hit the pause button.
Yeah.
And to be
It's
clear,
like,
you're saying stop.
I mean,
like,
I
that's
don't put my
yeah.
hand up, but it's
Yeah.
like putting up a stop sign.
Yeah.
so-
What are other phrases you guys can think of and just throw out there of like pause button phrases?
I think what Liz said of thank you so much for sharing your story. I think you could say that anytime in the conversation and end it there.
That's more of a stop than a pause.
Yeah, that's definitely
Or
when I
what
said.
if you say thank you for sharing that part of your story? That could be a pause rather than an end. If you just say your story, then yeah, that's an end.
I mean, I think a pause could be more like a, wow, I really appreciate that you shared that moment with me. Because that's not saying like, I've heard that moment and I'm reflecting on what you said there, not like, I'm done listening to you.
But could you have gotten that in there with him?
I don't think so.
That's what I'm saying.
I because I've talked to this man twice now, it is hard to get away from him. But I had to be very clear and just say, I need to leave now. I think I had to go to a class or something. I had something I had to go to, and I really needed to eat, or I had to go to team, maybe I had to go to team or something. So I finally just told him, I really have to eat something and I need to go. I have to go to the hospital. But I had to say it like twice because he would say, "Oh, okay," and then launch again, and then I had to say it again. So I had to be very clear with him. And then as I was walking away, he said this thing about the Mother Teresa. So I mean, so having also spoken to this patient and reading what you did, and I actually think he really just needs to talk. I think I loved what he said about this man probably feels invisible. And he's clearly intelligent. He probably was a math teacher or a scientist or he was something. He told me, I can't remember anymore. I mean, I think he's very intelligent and he probably feels really invisible now and lonely. I mean, think about it. How many of the nurses are going to have time to listen to him ramble, right? And if he's leaving here, like who visits him? You know, like I wondered. He talks about his friends, but I never see friends talking to him.
I also think beyond what we can just say, we can use our body language as
Mhm.
well. Like not to put the
Yeah,
hand
I do
up, but
that too.
if you're sitting next to the patient to stand up, and
Mhm.
that's because I've used that. It feels awkward to change your body language without kind of announcing, but if someone won't let you go, that's what I've done. Of like, or if I'm standing, then stepping back or changing how my hands are.
I consider that part of, and I actually was doing that in this. So I actually never sat down during this conversation, which I really should have done. This was going on for a while. And I did what I guess I tend to think is like the staggered leave in my head, which is, I don't want to say slowly starting to back out of the room, but like beginning to move away from the better. If I'm doing it with my out loud, it'll be kind of like, I don't know, a series of different comments that are like kind of leading up to an end.
There's one kind of strategy to how do you stop the person, and how do you eventually either pause or eventually stop it and leave. And that's kind of the experience of being trapped. It's kind of the so that's one level. Another level is are there ways to not interrupt, but it might feel like interrupting, maybe interjecting in a way to invite deeper or to focus in on what's most meaningful for them. That could be emotional or spiritual. What are some kind of interjections that you might think of? What?
I'm not sure if I'm following completely. Like if you took this example saying like, that's a lot of information that you're giving me,
That's a good one.
but I'd like to, But my question is, and I made this comment when you weren't in the room to Liz, are we then directing the conversation?
Well, sometimes we are.
Okay.
If this is the kind of patient, if you don't give some direction, you're there, but you're not. It's not an interaction. It's super introverted patients versus super extroverted, or perseverating or kind of how it's being effective. It's like some people, you're being super effective just by getting them to say anything.
I think he's
versus being effective in getting them to stop and say things in a different way. Like he's probably said this. When people tell stories over and over again, one narrative theory is that they're trying to get the story the story's doing something
to themselves.
Yeah, and maybe helping them go deeper into the story will free them from the story and free them to see it in a new way and to own it and to be transformed, right? The goal of spiritual care, of spirituality, is to help people break open and find some kind of freedom. Is that possible by directing this kind of?
Yeah, so this raises a really big issue for me, which is the way that we do charting here. Because Liz has no way of knowing if that, Gina visited this guy 3 days ago. He just told her the exact same story. And there's no way of knowing that. Because to me, like, if I visited this patient and I visited him on Monday and then I happen to stop in again on Wednesday and he goes through the same thing, then yes, I'm going to try and probe and I'm going to interrupt him so that we can have a deeper conversation. But that's because I'm the one who visited him and I know exactly what happened versus he's been here for however long.
Yeah, isn't there the book where you can write
But
narrative?
No,
No.
that's not how the book is used. The book is only if you are requesting follow up, if there's a reason why someone needs follow up, and then
if you're making
you know,
a referral,
yeah, a
like,
referral.
you'd give a little context. But for all Gina and I both know, he might have said this story to 17.
Yeah,
Every
every
chaplain-
person
chaplain
is
is
visiting. We have
yeah.
no way of
We
knowing.
have no way
I'm
of
sure
knowing.
he has actually.
Unless
How would-
he said,
How would knowing that change how you are with him?
Because if I'm visiting him for the first time, I think that the way that Liz interacted with him in this visit, and this is the first time he's done that, I think that's an appropriate interaction. If I knew that he's done this 15 times with the other chaplains, then I think that it is our response as chaplains to probe deeper, rather than just to hear the same story over and over again.
I think it's always our role to probe deeper. And everybody will probe deeper in a different way.
Yeah, I guess it really bothers me that I don't think that we're able to provide the best care to someone like this, who's been here for 2 months, and there's just not a lot of context, and that often, that's the other chaplains have said, it doesn't matter, just visit them, but I think in this case especially, it's just a perfect example of why it does matter. It does matter to know how the visit is going beyond what we're charting in there.
I think in this case, it would actually be helpful to maybe, in that book of referrals, to write something. Because if this man has been here 45 days, he could be here another 30, right? And so the chances of him being seen again is
Very high, yeah.
very high.
Yeah.
And even if all you say is, patient is extremely chatty, loves to talk about spiritual matters and healings, at least you're not going to make it your last patient of the day. You're not going to make it right before you die of hunger, before you go to lunch. You're going to at least try to leave, if nothing else, you're going to try to leave more time. Because that was part of my frustration, is that, it turned into a really long visit, and I was starving and I had to be somewhere. And your man was lovely, but I have to say, the second time, I, like you, was concerned about getting away, and I knew he was hard because I remembered. Oh no!
Yeah, I think so.
It does impact your
bigger-
visit.
I think we can revisit that. I think that's a great question. There should be some kind of functional follow up about critical patients.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
I've had 2 occasions, I think, in the last couple of months, where someone has said to me, well, you probably know this from the other chaplains.
Really?
Someone who's been here long term. Well, yeah, because
A lot of hospitals, there's a more involved charting process. This hospital has a particularly sparse.
it's also confusing. Like, sometimes I read, not to interrupt, but sometimes I read back through the charts and people have checked, prayer, ministry of presence, patient unavailable. I'm like, how can those 3 things fit together?
I definitely hear that question and that concern, and I share it. In the next 2 minutes, because I want to give you guys a chance where we'll have a didactic. I don't know if anybody needs to grab a granola bar. I do. But what are, just highlighting kind of spiritual assessment level, what are emotional or spiritual issues for this patient that would be helpful to direct him to go deeper on? Just like words or phrases.
I think the one about, you mentioned it several times already, what does he want to hear?
Yes.
Okay? That to me is what I heard throughout it
great.
when we were
Yeah,
reading
that's
it.
What does he want? What?
Healing.
Healing
for
for
it.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes.
That's, if he's talking about all these healings,
Yeah.
let's-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I tried.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think the healing, and then also, if he's talking about this healer, maybe to find out if he would appreciate a visit from them, or just to try and engage with that more.
also think loneliness
Yes.
was a factor here. I'm not sure
Mm.
what I would ask per se, but I do think that this person was just lonely and alone.
And I would also ask if he's looking for God to give him a miracle.
Yeah, I was something about miracles. I was getting that too. Yep.
And then, so often, when you've got a patient like this and they're going off, give yourself permission to disengage from the content stream.
Mm.
Take a step back. Reground yourself, because it's very ungrounding to just get kind of sucked in, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? I've got to follow every detail. So step back, ground yourself in your own spirituality, and then ask, what does this person really need? What is he really looking for? He clearly wants to be heard. He wants companionship. And then, so what is it? Loneliness. Awesome. What do you want him for? Or his kind of generally his own prayer connection with God. What is he asking for others, or and then re-engage in some way, even if you have to interrupt and say, "This really struck me," or reclaim the authority and show compassion. So how can you kind of a question you should always have, that we should always have as chaplains, is how can I express, demonstrate compassion? How can I connect? How can I join? Help this person feel heard, seen, acknowledged. And it's one thing for patients who just don't give you anything. Right? That's one struggle. This is a whole nother game. Because he's probably used to people never interrupting him and just letting him go. Right? That's another pitfall. Because maybe he does that to himself. We all self-sabotage, or whether it's we shut down or we take over. How can we cut through whatever and really meet, connect, see him? Because that question of, what do you want him for? Or, I wonder, maybe it's lonely to be here. An open-ended invitation, that's you're showing that you're right there with him.
But at one point, Liz, I think it's what? That's the only word you got out.
I literally get out like one word.
So seriously, okay, so she gets out what, and he's already on top of her. What would be the next way, to stop him right then? Because you're trying to, make
How do you get in?
intervention.
Is what you're
I was
asking.
gonna say, hold on.
Yeah.
Or just to repeat it, whatever you were gonna say, like,
Hold on before you change the subject.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What would you do as a therapist? A client just can't shut up. It's not helpful.
You burned that hat.
Well, yeah, we definitely would say, that's not a tangent that we're here about. I need you to go back to what you said about that. But you're in a director's seat then. You're in a one-up position always. So that's been what's been hard for me to get rid of.
Switch. Yeah.
In this ministry, somebody said to me, why is it different? And I'm like, it's completely different. One, it's not a one-up position. I don't feel it is at all. And I feel a meeting of equals on God's terms. You know, God created both of us. We're both here. You know, I don't know what you did for a living. You don't know what I did for a living. That's not why we're here. So I see it very differently.
Well, it's a work in progress. I don't have answers, but it sounds like you are all getting better. And that's what this is about.
I just said that this morning. I thought I was finally getting it.
That's good. I think
Light
you already
bulbs.
had it.
I know, me too.
Hey now,
What are
let's not get ahead of
what's going
ourselves.
on? Can we get a
I'm hungry.
Yeah.
explain what's going on?
Yeah. So,
Didactic, you said.
Dr. Chaudhry, Muslim doctor, here is going to do a didactic. She might be right outside, but I'll give you guys like a 2 minute break to come back.
Is it from noon to 1? Or
Probably 12:45,
okay, and then we're having lunch.
and then we're
with
going to
tea?
have lunch. We're going to go to team
We're going to
Okay.
team, okay.
because they've got some meetings.
Are we bringing our lunch in there?
So we'll grab lunch, grab stuff you can
To go?
to go,
Okay.
and then we'll head over there right
Are we
after.
walking over, driving over?
Let's drive.
Okay.
Who's got a car?
I drove here.
I drove too.
So
I drove with Laura.
Yeah.
So I do
let's
not
just
have
go
a car.
the way we.
Okay.
we came. Unless you want to
Carpool?
carpool.
Yeah, I'm happy to drive.
I'll take a ride.
Yeah, do you want
Like-
to ride
Yeah,
with me?
sure.
Okay, yeah,
Unless
no
you want
worries.
to sit in a kid's seat.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to come with me too, but you can all
I
fit.
Can you
may,
fit it?
Okay.
Yeah, I may
Yeah.
be running
I mean,
around.
it's a 2-minute drive,
Yeah,
so.
but everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, just get your
Okay, so we're
The
take
whole
our
garage
lunch
then.
and eat it there
Yeah.
at this meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we're coming back here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll do 3 theological reflections.
So
Yeah.
I go to the bottom of the page, so I haven't put that off. I just like that little.
Thank you.
Yeah, me too, that's a good plan.
Go recycle these.
Thank you. That's good.
Sometimes I walk out with them.
I know, I have to.
For the first time this week, I accidentally carried a census home. I hadn't done that.
Oh, really?
before.
I haven't done that.
But I was coming back the next day, so I.
Oh,
Yeah, I did it once, but
I
I
think
I
I did
taken
it.
kept it in a sacred spot.
Oh, yeah, I just left it right in my purse and knew it wasn't
I've
gonna make
taken
it out of there
verbatim
alive.
some, but I have not taken it.